Do you have questions about your favorite podcasters? Have you always been curious about Tom's background? Too bad. Chris is going to interview me anyway.
This is Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Welcome to the show.
So this is part two of our experiment.
Yep.
We thought for some reason people might be interested in our background, and maybe just for lack of a better idea, we decided to interview each other for individual episodes. You withstood the pressure, I thought, very well. I'm very proud of that episode. See what you can do with me.
I will try to avoid any really bad between the ferns questions.
Yeah, that's the first thing you said to me was, "Have you ever seen the show Between the Ferns?" And I thought, motherfucker. I thought I took the wrong approach to interviewing you, I think.
All right, Tom, this is your life, or at least part of it. So Tom Polachek is a practicing attorney in Joliet, Illinois. He has been married, I think, closing in on 30 years, man, and has three children, two twins, boys, and his oldest daughter, who recently graduated from Temple University. Tom is a Hall of Fame football player at Washington University. He's a co-host of a show called Third Song In, podcast that I believe is out there somewhere. And he's my best friend. So I thought I'd take the opportunity to learn a little bit more about him. Anything you would have wanted me to include there? I know there's a whole lot more for me to add there.
Actually, one slight correction. We just passed 30 years of marriage
Oh,
just last
okay.
September. So you're pretty much on, but we 3 decades, I'm pretty proud of that.
You should be. That's good. And Tom's, as we were recording this, Tom is quickly closing in on two things. One, his 59th birthday, and two, a lot closer to empty nester status, which he wrote a blog about a while ago, which I think is still the best blog that we've put out. I thought it was very heartwarming and touching insight into you as a parent, and we'll get there with some of my questions.
Oh, that's nice of you to say. I thought you were going to say he was closing in on a massive coronary.
I hope not. I really hope not. So. All right, let me start with a couple easy ones, and these are a little open-ended. When I grew up in roughly the same town, lived there my whole life, lived in a couple houses as we sort of, my parents moved up the economic ladder a little bit, as but you moved around a lot. Do you want to give us a quick overview of what your childhood was like and all the various places you lived?
Yeah, I did. I moved around a ton. I once figured it out, and up until I got, I guess, to college, my average time in any school district was 4 years. Now we lived in the same area, and sometimes that was because we moved from one county to another. But I want to say that when I was in West Virginia, I think the longest I was ever in one area with the same classmates was about 7 years. But the average was about four because I know I went to school when I was probably in second grade in Skokie, Illinois, and I think I was there for literally 1 year, and then we moved again. I can't give you a really good explanation for why we moved. My dad, I think he was very willing to just relocate and try something new, which in retrospect, I respect, and it made for a very kind of interesting life. And I can, when my kids point out, or when we talk about a state or a town, I almost like eight times out of 10, I can say, yeah, I live near there. But it was a little tough on us, my brother and I, when we were growing up. It was, we were constantly having to make new friends and try to, figure out the lay of the land in different places. Again, looking back on it, I think it was probably good for me. I think that one of the things I learned was that you can do that just about anywhere you go. You can make new friends. You can create, a life for yourself and establish yourself. But I remember it being kind of tough always being the new kid, literally always being the newest guy in the class and the one who not everybody knows.
So you mentioned your brother, and in a recent episode, I agreed with your brother that you're an asshole. Um,
Well, yeah,
what,
yeah.
what was your late relationship with your brother like when you were growing up, and how is it these days?
So we're 3 years apart, and that doesn't seem like much, but based upon kind of the timing of everything, we were never in the same school at the same time. And a lot of that, I think, had to do with the moves that we made. There were, but I guess technically we were both in elementary school and we lived in West Virginia. I was in sixth grade. He would have been in third grade at that point. But even then, the school I went to, which was kind of on the top of a hill in outside of Wheeling, West Virginia, the sixth graders, all of our classes were in a trailer that was like separate from the rest of the building. So my brother's, he was in the building. The sixth graders were away from the first through fifth graders. So we were never ever in the same place at the same time school wise. And we had sibling rivalry, but we also it seemed like we were just far enough apart that it wasn't that bad. Like we didn't fight a lot. There weren't a lot of physical fights. We didn't beat each other up or anything like that because I was always significantly bigger than he was, and we were very we kind of lived separate lives from each other, even though we were living in the same house for a lot of that period of time. And then all of a sudden, when he hit about seventh or eighth grade, he was bigger than me. Like he shot up. He got taller than me. He ended up being just bigger than me in general. He was when he played football, both in high school and college. He was a lineman, offensive and defensive lineman, and I was playing running back. And that's because he ended up being big and strong as hell. But when he was in high school, I was in college, and again, there was just kind of a separation there. I think we had sibling rivalry in the sense that I think we were both jealous of each other. I think we both thought that our mom and dad liked the other one better, but there weren't a lot of arguments. We just kind of did our own things and were separate from each other. And truthfully, that kind of has carried through. He lives in the South now. He lives in Mississippi now. He lived in Florida for years and years. And we keep in touch. There was a long stretch of time where we didn't have much contact. Recently, there's been a lot more texts and phone calls, just kind of keeping track of each other. But we don't see each other very often. I would tell you that I think the last time I saw him in person was over 20 years ago. So we just don't. He doesn't travel up here for holidays. We have not spent a lot of time like going down to visit him. We did go to Florida once, took the kids to Disney, and he drove actually a long way to see us there. But other than that, and I think that may be the last time I saw him. So I think the boys were like, they were probably 4 or 5. So that would actually make it about 14 years ago was the last time I guess I saw him in person.
So you mentioned your dad, and I think when you interviewed me, I talked about at one point I had this epiphany of, oh shit, if I was my dad, I'd have 2 kids, right now. What did you learn about being a dad from your dad?
That's a good question. He gave us a lot of independence. Some of it, I think, was intentional. Some of it was just because he had other shit going on. He worked a lot. He wasn't home a lot. And he would kind of come home and be exhausted and pass out at like 8 o'clock, which right now I can relate to. But at the time, we didn't see him. I think we certainly didn't see him as much as my kids have seen me as they've been growing up. But my dad's a very honest guy. And I think he really, I think he values intelligence, and that's something that I think I've taken with me. And when you recognize intelligence, you say so, and it's a tough question because I think what I learned from him was more just in observing him as much more than like sit down lessons. But my dad's a very hard worker. And as I said, I think he's a really smart guy, and I think I tried to emulate him to that degree. I also think I learned some things not to do. I think he'd be the first one to tell you that, because of the fact that he had other priorities when we were younger, He didn't spend as much time with us as I think he would have liked to. I made it a point in my life to spend as much time with my kids. I made career decisions specifically that allowed me to have more time to be able to see soccer games and go to, ice skating recitals and competitions and stuff like that. And, you know, those decisions were made based upon the fact that I remember wishing that my folks had seen more of those things.
Do you remember the first record or single that you bought yourself?
I remember, I don't remember the first. It's funny because my playlist pick I think is going to be the very first single I remember, but I didn't get it myself. It was in my I think my mom's collection of 45s. I can remember that the first CD I bought after I got a CD player was Bat Out of Hell by Meatloaf. And it was actually one of the first two because I think the other was Brothers in Arms with Dire Straits. I think those are the very first two CDs I bought. I remember the first cassette that I bought was, I want to say it was a Hank Williams Jr. cassette.
Wow.
And at roughly the same time, because I had two cassettes for a long time because it's all I could afford to buy for myself. It was a Seeger album, and I think it was Live Bullet, which is funny because you've talked about Live Bullet so often. But I think I had the cassette for Live Bullet because didn't that have Beautiful Loser on it?
Yes.
I remember whatever cassette I had, it was either the studio recording that had Beautiful Loser or it was Live Bullet, and I'm pretty sure it was the live one. Going back to, I didn't buy a lot of LPs, I didn't buy a lot of 45s. By the time I was purchasing music, it had switched over to cassettes, and then CDs when we got to college.
Funny, the first album I bought was the Dire Straits one, so we have a
It's funny.
common, yeah.
Which one was it? Was it Brothers in Arms or was it before that?
It was the album that had Sultans of Swing on it, which I'm
Oh
actually looking
yeah,
up now.
which I
So
think
I
is
bought,
called Dire Straits.
yeah, I think it's just a self-titled one. And that was sort of a lesson to me because I bought it for that song. And I actually, at the time, I mean, I
Yeah,
was young, so it was definitely an LP. It was the vinyl. I didn't like a lot of the rest of the album, so I feel like it's like
yeah,
shit. I spent a lot of money on one song because you mentioned 45s; those are no longer a thing. But used to be able
yeah.
to buy just a single, and then on the other side would be the B side, which was usually a crappy song. But sometimes you get lucky and have another good song on the other side. So
Yeah, yeah. That was my folks' record collection where my dad had all kinds of LPs and I listened to those a ton. And we did have this little blue box that had all kinds of 45s and they were my mom's, I think mainly from high school. So a lot of, 50s and, kind of early rock and roll stuff that was on 45. I wish I had those now.
all right, let's move on to another phase of your life. I'm pretty sure I roughly remember this, but let's help our audience better understand. How did you meet your wife and how did you propose to her?
All right. I met Dawn. She was a freshman when we were seniors. The first time I met her was we had an away football game at the University of Rochester. My senior year was the beginning of the conference. It was the University Athletic Association. It was a big deal. It was kind of like a little Ivy League, or at least that was the intention. And we got to play as a football team, we got to play a couple games against UAA schools, but a lot of the UAA schools didn't even have football teams. So it wasn't a great conference to play in for football, but we did get a chance my senior year to fly to Rochester, New York and play a game there. And I don't know how intentional it was, but at the same time, the volleyball team played either their UAA tournament or maybe it was just a match against Rochester. And the football team and the volleyball team all stayed in the same hotel. So it must have been relatively early fall because the hotel had a pool and we were out at the pool, like we were out in bathing suits and stuff. And there was this hot freshman that was there wearing a two-piece bathing suit, and I said, "Who the hell is that?" And one of our buddies, guy I played ball with, knew her, had met her, and gave me her name. and I think introduced me. So I think technically that's the first time I ever actually met her or spoke to her. But we didn't really start dating until her senior year, and I ended up bartending at their end of the year volleyball party. And I took her home from that party and dropped her off at her dorms because she still lived in dorms even as a senior. That was kind of when we decided, like I asked her out that night and we went out, I think, the following weekend. So that's kind of how I met her, but it was spread over roughly 3 years. I was in law school by the time we started to date. And I asked her to marry me when I was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Columbia, Missouri, studying for the bar. My furniture consisted of an air mattress, half a dozen of those plastic milk crates, which I built into shelves, a borrowed couch, and a Pop-A-Shot machine. Those are those are the pieces of furniture in my apartment. And she came down to or came from St. Louis. She was in St. Louis at the time. She came to visit me over a weekend. I made her dinner. I can't remember what I made. I just remember she hated it. And I asked her to marry me. Didn't even yet have a ring. Asked her to marry me, and we got a ring. Like it might have taken another 6 months before I actually got her the ring. But that was it was pretty weak, to tell you the truth. It wasn't the strongest proposal you've ever seen, but she did say yes, or she might have said, "Yeah, okay," something like that.
As long as you never make this meal again.
Yeah, exactly. I think I just exactly. I think I scared her into saying yes.
All right, you just mentioned law school a couple times. I have one softball question, and then I have a legitimate question that it's funny that I have to ask this. So one, when did you decide that you wanted to be a lawyer? What went into that decision? And two, what kind of fucking law do you practice? I don't even know what you do.
I have mentioned it once or twice, but
You have, I think. I think I know somewhat.
The when did I decide part is kind of tough to answer, and I figured you were going to ask something along those lines. So I was thinking about it, and the reality is I think I always thought I was going to end up being a lawyer. My grandfather, my dad's father, was a lawyer in Chicago. My dad's youngest sibling, his brother, Fred, is a lawyer, a very successful lawyer in Providence, Rhode Island. Fred was one of my idols growing up. He played football. He played college ball at Brown. He was a really funny guy. He was a smart ass. He was just one of those guys that always seemed to get in trouble, but also always seemed to get himself out of trouble. He's quite a bit younger than my dad. I think he's at least 10 years. I think he's about 10 years younger than my dad. So he was close to my age, or it felt closer anyway, certainly than my dad. And I always looked up to him as well. And I knew he went to law school. And my grandfather, who scared the hell out of me, I knew he was a lawyer. I also knew that I liked, in high school, although I got good grades kind of across the board, I much more enjoyed the humanities. I much more enjoyed history and English and those kind of studies. So it just seemed to me that I didn't know what else I was going to do if I studied in that area other than teaching. And even back then, I realized I wasn't really cut out to be a teacher. So in college, I took history classes, English classes, philosophy classes. It was all humanities stuff. So I was either going to go into academia or go to law school. And although I wouldn't kind of flat out announce I was going to go to law school, I was always just kind of pointed in that direction. So I took a year after graduation from college. I worked for the university. That's when you and I were living together, primarily with Joe Pay. And that's when I took the LSAT, scored okay, and started applying to law schools. And I just kind of flowed in that direction without really making a solid decision that, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And then to respond to the other question, currently, my practice is about 90% personal injury plaintiff's work. So I represent people who are injured due to the negligence of others, a lot of motor vehicle accidents, a lot of slip and falls, trip and falls, that kind of stuff. It's not what I started out doing, but I have been doing it for almost 20 years now. When I got out of law school, I worked for the Attorney General's office in Missouri, representing the Commission on Human Rights. when I moved up to Joliet, I did just about everything, but I was hired by my firm primarily to represent a policeman's union. So I did a lot of labor work, a lot of grievances, a lot of collective bargaining, negotiating, and police disciplinary stuff, which is kind of a nice way to start being a lawyer because those things kind of cover everything you might want to do, in terms of litigation and also transactional stuff, like I said, contracts and things like that. But when I found out we were going to have twins, I decided that representing the union wasn't going to work because I drove all over Northern Illinois every day. I was constantly driving to different places, getting home really late. Kind of coincidentally, at the same time, I formed a new firm. And one of the holes in our practice was we didn't have anybody really who was doing personal injury. And that's when I decided, along with my partners, that I was probably best suited for it because I'm pretty organized, and that goes a long way towards resolving those kind of cases. So that's when I started doing PI work, and that's pretty much what I've been doing since then.
So I remember the union stuff, and I think that's where my brain stuck.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it's been a long time now, but I did that for probably almost 9 or 10 years. And that was definitely what I was originally hired to do. I worked with a senior partner, and then I even did it a little bit after my firm split, where he was actually with the other firm and I was with the new firm, and we were both representing the same client for a while. But then, like I said, once I found out we were going to have twins, we already had a 2-year-old at the time I found that out. I thought, or a 3-year-old, I guess. I didn't think that was going to work very well. So in fact, it's one of the decisions I made to make sure that I would be around for my kids, was I wasn't going to be doing all that kind of stuff.
all right, just a couple more questions, and you've done a nice job of helping me segue. You talked a little bit about, being settled in Joliet. So one of the differences, when I grew up, I was mostly in the same place. You traveled all over. As we got older, I traveled a little bit more. I've relocated to, different parts of the country, settled in for a while in each one, but you've always been in Joliet. So what drove you to Joliet? Not vehicle wise. What took you?
I had a Chevy Monte Carlo. It's 1977.
Yes, I remember that one. Heavy ass doors, dark
Yes,
green.
that's right.
But what brought you to Joliet? And you talk a lot about it as a community. What are some of your favorite things about Joliet?
The best way I can describe how I got to Joliet is to go to a period of time where I was already in Joliet. My wife, Dawn, one of her best friends, also went to Washington University. When we first moved up here, he lived in Chicago. He was from Chicago originally. He was working for some company up in the city. We would visit him every few weekends. We would go up into the city. We didn't have any kids. We'd spend the weekend, crash at somebody's house. It was awesome. But she kept in really good touch with this particular friend. And he met a woman while he was working. They got engaged. They got married. And within a year, he told Dawn that he was moving to Dallas because that's where her family was from. And Dawn was furious. She was so fucking angry at this guy's wife because she was tearing him and taking him away and making him move to where her family was. And after listening to her like on a tirade for like 3 or 4 days in a row, I stopped her. I said, "Hey, do you have any idea why I live in Joliet?" I said, "Your family's 5 minutes from here. Why do you think I wouldn't have picked Joliet to live in?" And she kind of looked at me and went, "Well, that's different." And she just stormed out of the room. And that's really what it was. I was working in Jefferson City after law school. I worked for the Attorney General's office. It wasn't like I didn't want to get into government. I didn't want to get into politics. But frankly, at that time, it was hard to get a job out of law school as a lawyer. So I think it was the only offer I had coming out of law school. I think they paid about 27 grand or something like that, which was more than I'd ever made before, but sure as hell wasn't much for a lawyer coming out of law school, even in those days. I lived in Columbia, Missouri, as I mentioned, and I would commute the 20 miles or so down to Jeff City for work every day. While I was doing that, and particularly after we were engaged, Dawn moved to Columbia for just a little while. She was living with me there. We found a different apartment, a little bigger. We got some furniture other than just a Papa-Shot and an air mattress. But while we were there, while I was working at the AG's office, and as Dawn was, I think she was wait tables and stuff, her mom was furiously combing the one ads and looking for legal jobs up in this area. And she would, and again, it was, no internet. She would literally send us envelopes with the classified ads out of Joliet with jobs circled on them. And I would look through them, and I was good about looking and responding. And I ended up applying for a job working for the city of Joliet's legal department. Interviewed, I think had a good interview. The gentleman that I interviewed with, I eventually became friends with. He basically contacted me and said, "Look, we're not going to be able to hire you for this position, but if it's okay with you, I'm going to give your name to an attorney I know from a private firm here in Joliet." And that ended up being Shank Duffy, McNamara, Phelan and Quinn. They hired me. That's the firm I'm in now is basically just an offshoot, a split from that firm. So I'm here primarily because of my wife's mom, who did most of the legwork for me, and I just had to do the interview.
Community wise, I know you go to a lot of concerts. I think you're fairly close. It's a hop and a skip to Chicago. But what's your favorite thing about Joliet?
I'm definitely more comfortable I think in a suburban environment. I like being on the outskirts. I like being close enough to the city, as you said, to be able to go up and see a show or go see a Bulls game or, that kind of thing. But I also like being far enough away that I don't have to deal with the traffic and just how crowded it is. Plus, I like a little more green space, I guess. One of the things I learned as I grew up is that, most towns are kind of the same. The people are the same. They're good people, they're bad people. Or at least most of the towns I lived in were the same, very working class type of places. Wheeling, West Virginia was like that. Du Bois, Pennsylvania was like that. Medford, Oregon was like that. And Joliet is like that. I like the people here. I think it is a great place to raise my kids. Joliet is close enough to the city to be, I think, fairly diverse. We've talked about that in the past. I think my kids, growing, they have an interesting experience because they went to a private Montessori school up through 8th grade, which was very small, fairly diverse, but not tremendously so. And then when they went to high school, they went from a graduating 8th grade class, each of them, I think the boys' class was like, I think that was 8 people. And I think my daughter's was 9 or 10 people. And then they're entering class into Joliet West. The boys' class is over 1,000. Wow. They're graduating from a class of over 1,000 kids. The Joliet West has about 4,500 kids. And I'm glad they did that. I think it was the best thing that could have happened to them. And I like the sense of community around here. There's good and bad, of course, anywhere you go. But I think it was the right balance for me anyway.
All right, 2 more questions. Moving a little bit more philosophical, reflective maybe. So are you a better dad or a better husband?
I'm a better dad. I'm a pretty good husband, and I don't know if my wife agrees with that at all. I've always been very supportive of her. For those listeners who know my wife, she's very, she's pretty ambitious. She's very competitive. She works her ass off. She can kind of operate with blinders on sometimes. And fairly early on, I was just, I think, very supportive when she wanted to, try a new job. I was supportive of that. I'd say, my fair share of the household stuff, and part of that's because she's a horrible housekeeper. So if the house needed to be clean, it was probably going to be me. But, when it comes to things like things that had to do with the kids, it was at least equal. And we've done a pretty good job, I think, of being a good partnership in that regard. We have to take turns. We have to adjust. We have to kind of improvise, and always have, because our kids have been active in so many things. So I think I'm a good husband, but I think I'm a better dad. And I think a lot of it has to do with I made it my purpose to be around for them and share stuff with them and try to be available to answer questions and deal with stuff.
Very good.
By the way,
sort
that's
of
an
way.
awesome question. I wish I had thought of that question when I was interviewing you.
Well, this isn't such an awesome question. It's the last one though. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, since our website is black and yellow. So why the fucking Steelers?
Well, all right. So that's pure geography, right? I've mentioned before, but I lived in West Virginia. I lived in Western PA. Most of my formative years were spent in one of those two states. And when I lived in West Virginia, I lived in the Northern Panhandle. So Wheeling, West Virginia is roughly 40, or maybe it's less. It might be 30 miles from Pittsburgh. It's very similar to the relationship of Joliet with the city of Chicago. It's not actually a suburb, but it might as well be. I think it's an exurb, maybe that's the term now. So from roughly 10 years old until 16, actually probably 17, I lived in or around Wheeling, which is huge Steelers country. And it was the 70s. So they were kicking everybody's ass. So pretty easy to be a Steelers fan because they were winning 4 out of 5 Super Bowls, and they were that good. And then when I moved from Wheeling, we moved to Du Bois, Pennsylvania, which is close. It's kind of central PA, but they consider themselves Western PA. It's closer to Pittsburgh than Philadelphia, and also huge Steeler country. So there was big change for me to move my junior year of high school from one town to another, but the one constant was the Steelers. And I didn't start out that way, by the way. When I was kind of in grade school, like 6th or 7th grade, I tried to be a rebel. And I think for a little bit, so I was a Bears fan because my dad was a Bears fan. And that was the heyday of Walter Payton. So it was, again, easy to root for Chicago. It was before they won a Super Bowl. By the time they won the Super Bowl, I was a Steelers fan. But in my junior high years, there was a short period of time where I was a Bears fan, and I've always been a Walter Payton fan. And then there was also, I remember I owned a Houston Oilers jersey, also 34, and that was completely because of Earl Campbell. Basically, when I started playing football around 7th grade, I was a running back from the beginning. So I rooted for running backs, sometimes even more than I rooted for teams. But slowly and surely, I became a Steelers fan.
Oh, that makes sense.
It's a better explanation than my boys who live outside of Chicago and are bigger Steelers fans than I think I ever was. Like, they know more about the team than I know now, and probably ever knew, at any point in time.
Cool though. More reflection on you as their dad, a Steelers fan. So
but
that's all I got. I did not actually. I had a couple obnoxious, embarrassing questions, but I decided to take this more seriously.
Like, when was your first period?
Yeah. I was gonna say, you don't remember what the first record you bought, but when was the first time you masturbated?
I don't know. I can't tell you the first time. I can tell you the last time.
That would have been a better question. It's like, what's the one? When did you stop beating your wife?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
When did you stop masturbating at work? So that then takes us to our recommendations. A couple seasons ago, we started lining up our recommendations with a year in the calendar year. So this year we're in the aughts, the 2000 decade, and this is the 7th episode. So we're at the year 2007. Thomas, I'll let you go first since you were the interviewee. What is your recommendation from 2007?
I had a tough time with this. There's an album, and then there are a couple of movies that I looked at that came out in 2007 that I really loved. I think I'm going to go film. I'm going to call an audible, and I'm going to go with the Simpsons movie. There was a time, and I think you would agree with me, but there was a time where I think that the Simpsons was the most important pop culture icon in my life. I mean, I didn't miss an episode on Sunday nights. The Simpsons were syndicated by that time, so they were on. You could watch probably 3 or 4 times a day if you wanted to. And I think I watched a couple times a day, at least for stretches, that would be the case. I think that the writers for that show were brilliant. I think, I think it probably at this point, because it's still on, I think it's probably jumped the shark some time ago, but I haven't watched it in a long time. But back then in 2007, it was one of the most important, like I said, pop culture parts of my life. And I couldn't believe, I thought it was really interesting that they came out with a movie kind of just out of the blue. Like it wasn't the situation where the series ended and they wanted to cap it off with a movie. It was just kind of in the middle of everything. But it was an extended Simpson episode, but they also, because it was a movie, and I think it was PG or PG-13, they pushed the envelope a little bit further than I think they could when they were on broadcast TV. I love the fact that I believe the opening of the movie, isn't that the one where Bart was skateboarding with no pants on? I believe that's, I think that was the opening credit scene for the movie itself. But anyway, it had an actual story. There was a plot to it, and there was a little bit of character development, although not a whole lot because those characters have been developed a long time ago. But I also thought it was really funny. And when I played it for my kids, probably around 2010 or so, 2011, they loved it as well. And it's a movie I go back to every few years just because I really love it. So my 2007 recommendation is The Simpsons movie.
Yeah, I'm surprised just because Wilco is such a big part of your musical life. And
Yeah, so my outline shows that the first thing I thought of when and it's because it's, I Googled albums that came out in 2007, but Sky Blue Sky was their 2007 album. And I think that's really underrated. By the time that album came out, I think that's probably, I don't know, what is it, 12th, 13th album? They had already put out a lot of work. And I was getting a little tired of their stuff. There was a point where I felt like, I mean, they were trying to reach out and do new things, but I didn't really like the direction they were going. This one, it's very poppy still. It's certainly not alt country in the way that they started, but I always really liked that album, and I don't think many people put it on their top Wilco list. There's a song on there called "What Light" that they play pretty regularly in concert. I've seen Wilco play, probably 4 or 5 times, and I think they've done it. They've done it every concert, and lots of times it's the last song, not the encore song, but the last song before they take their break, because they have this call out and response thing that they do, and it just goes on forever. And we saw them at Lollapalooza outside, and they did that, and it was a beautiful night, and the Chicago skyline was in the background, and it was really a moving song to listen to. So I came close to picking that, but The Simpsons. In my heart, I have to say The Simpsons may be even more important than Wilco.
Yeah, and you're 100% right in the cultural influence. I mean, Simpsons was must-watch TV. I mean, it was, and like you said, it never got old. Like you need to watch it in syndication. The cleverness, I felt, people often dismiss, the goofy, not animation, but the cartoonish nature of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's got some significant humor in it. I mean, it's sharp-edged humor, and it's got the goofy ass shit too, like Bart skateboarding without pants on. So, but it's funny. I'm going to get back to this with my playlist pick, and I know I don't do this out of spite. There's this weird thing I have about us sort of owning things. And Wilco was always yours. Like you were way more into Wilco than I was. When they started off, I went the Son Volt route, and I don't know that Son Volt has sort of kept it up. I love his voice, but I haven't loved a lot of his materials. So I do think that Wilco's the more successful, but I've never gravitated towards them because they were yours. And
yeah, it's funny because you've mentioned that before, and Wilco's definitely more prolific. Farrar just puts out less stuff, but it's funny when I think back. Although I liked Wilco, I love their first 2 or 3 albums a ton. I've always, I think, liked Son Volt better. So it's funny that your kind of impression of that was that I took possession of Wilco, and I understand that feeling. But when I think about it, if gun to my head, I got to listen to a Wilco album or a Son Volt album, I will listen to Trace,
Yep.
or Straightaways. I'll listen to that before I listen to even to AM, which I think is a great album, or Being There, which is also a great album. That's such an interesting discussion only because it's those two guys and they both
Yep.
came from the band that we both like better than both of them, probably, right? Which is Uncle
Yes,
Tupelo.
absolutely. Yeah. All right. So I went with an album, stuck and then sticking with it. Did the same thing, Googled, and it was an easy choice for me. It's Boxer by The National. I talked a little bit about them. They're sort of from Cincinnati area, and I've always seen them as a hometown band, even though I haven't been in Cincinnati in 40 years. But I feel like they were really in the midst of a fantastic streak of albums. I think their debut album was great. I'm gonna forget the name of the second one. But then after that, the third album was Alligator, and then this is their fourth. The one after this, I think, was High Violet. So those five albums are as strong as any starting five albums. We talked about this, I think, with one of our guests. Oftentimes, the first couple albums, if they're great, bands can go one of two directions. They can try to be too popular and start to suck and go off the rails, or they can really hit their stride and come out with what I feel are mature Hallmark type of albums. And I feel that Alligator and Boxer were those start to finish. I mean, it starts out with Fake Empire, which is one of their best songs, and then an even better one is Mistaken for Strangers. My favorite song on the album is Start a War. It's just, but I could probably pick out three or four other songs on there. And National has just hit where they're a big band. I mean, they're a really important, really influential band. I love the National. I don't love their latest stuff. I think it's like you sort of got with Wilco. I'm just feeling a little too much. I don't feel that the last couple albums have built upon the strength of the first several, but I could still listen to any of them. But these are my two favorite, with Boxer being from 2007, and then Alligator was a year or two before that. So
Yeah, I'm not a National fan.
I know.
And they're highly acclaimed, and as you said, they're a big band. They'll if you look at the poster for a festival, if they're playing in the summer, they're always in the biggest type, right? They're the ones that everybody goes to see. I feel like there's some droniness there, particularly Boxer. That's the one I think, because you put songs from that album I know on playlists, and they just never hit me right. And actually, I think your comparison to them to the kind of the period of Wilco that I didn't like is pretty apt, because I feel like they're not all that different. Now, having said that, I haven't listened to a lot of the other albums because I just didn't really like the first couple that I heard. And I do think I'm in the minority when it comes to that band. And they were, when you would read the alt country, the Americana magazines like No Depression and what have you, they raved about the National, especially the album that you're recommending. They loved it, and I just couldn't get it. It just was not one of those that I fell into my favorites at all. But on the other hand, I think in terms of a recommendation, again, I don't know that there's a whole lot more important albums that came out in 2007 than that one.
Yeah, and I get it, and I think we talked about this other podcast, Song Exploder. They had a great episode with the National, and it made me appreciate them even more, where the band members are technically very musical, whereas the lead singer is, he writes the lyrics, but I don't even know. I mean, I'm sure he can read music, but he was much more of the voice of the band.
Right.
And they settled on what their roles are. And I appreciated that. Almost looked at it as an organizational structure for my own, because I work with a bunch of really technical people. I am not as technical as those folks by any stretch. I know how technology should work and support business. And I think that's sort of where the lead singer is. So just there's sort of a inspiration there for other reasons too.
Our next segment is staff picks. Just around the corner from you. This is our opportunity to recommend stuff that's either out now or coming out soon. You made I think, a nice little segue to my staff pick in mentioning the podcast Song Exploder, which I'm a big fan of, because my staff pick this episode is kind of a podcast. It's from a guy who does a it's from a guy who does a podcast. He also has a blog, however, on Substack. And this is a nice opportunity for us to mention that we also have a blog on Substack that you can subscribe to. Third Song In is searchable on Substack. But there's a writer named Shea Serrano who has written a bunch of interesting books. He does a lot of online commentary, and he just started a film blog called Good Movie. What he does is he does a rewatch of a film and does a kind of not minute by minute, but he does a breakdown of important scenes. He tells you at what point in the film these scenes are. He's hilarious. He's so funny. But I also think he's very insightful when he breaks down film. The blog on Substack includes at least one video clip. He'll talk about a scene, and now he'll do one. He'll embed it into the blog itself, and he does it kind of pop-up video style. So these little commentaries will pop up on the bottom corner of the video, and they can be absolutely hilarious. Like, he makes me laugh out loud. Just about every one of these I've read so far, and it only just started. I think he has maybe 4 episodes, issues. I don't know what you call it when it's a blog, but he does a really good job of including his written work along with video and kind of video commentary. I watched a free one, and Substack, a lot of Substack is pay subscription, and it's one of the only Substack blogs that I am paying for because I thought it was so good. And I do recommend it. I think it's really cool. It just, as I said, I think he's only been doing it for about a month. He's written a lot of other cool books. He's done some graphic novel style books. He's a big NBA fan. He did a book about the NBA that I found really interesting. That was all illustrated. I don't think he did the art. I think someone else did it, but it was kind of all graphic novel style. Anyway, his name's Shea Serrano, Serrano, and you can find Good Movie on Substack. And I don't know exactly how Substack works in that regard, but you can at least get a taste of his writing and then decide whether you'd want to actually pay to read it. But I think it's worthwhile, and I'm really recommending it. I've had a lot of fun reading and watching these things.
That I will definitely check out because it's a blog. I can handle the link there.
Yeah.
I still haven't finished that book.
I was going to skip post facto so you didn't have to say that.
All right, so my staff pick is another easy one. The Nationals, one of my favorite bands. A band that I probably like more because I feel they're wholly underappreciated is Roadside Graves. So Roadside Graves just came out with an EP called Interlude, the Aquarium Drunkard Lagniappe Sessions. I know Aquarium Drunkard is record label. I don't know if they got bought out by Lagniappe. I don't understand that one. 4 songs and very acoustic. It has all the strengths of the band that I like. The harmonizing. They have 2 lead singers that when they sing together, I think it's magical. I love their voices. They have very few followers on any of the streaming services. And I think in some ways I sort of get it, but I don't. I feel like they deserve a much bigger audience. They have the songwriting chops. They can sing as well as, I mean, especially when they sing together. I know I've put several of their songs on our various playlists, and I think, Tom, you've generally liked them. So it's not like one of those bands that I like. 16 Horsepower, I get it why people don't like them. They're kind of hard to listen to. But this is a band that deserves a bigger audience. And I do want to read on their Bandcamp page. This is their self-description. Roadside Graves are educators, an environmental scientist, and a tech guru who hail from all over New Jersey, with one stray up in Providence, Rhode Island. They've been a band for 25 years and have no intention of ever stopping because why not? And that just sort of feels like the band to me. So Roadside Graves, Interlude, 4-song EP, definitely worth checking out.
Cool. I will do that. I will do that today, as a matter of fact. Next up is playlist picks. Every episode, we each pick a song to add to our running season 7 playlist. What episode are we on? So we're up to our 13th and 14th songs, I think, for this season. And when we pick these songs, we try to pick songs that are consistent with the theme of the episode. I'm not sure what the theme of this particular episode is.
I am. It's
Tired,
Tom. It's Tom Polachek.
tired attorney. I don't know. That doesn't seem right. But I actually, looking at the outline, think we have two great songs. So maybe it's just really great songs.
I will start. I went with one of those bands that I've always felt is yours, and I listen to them because they're too damn good not to listen to. Lucero, is it Lucero? Lucero? I don't even never know how to pronounce
I
it.
think it's Lucero. I think it's pronounced
Okay,
Lucero.
we'll go with Lucero. Their album from 2002, Tennessee. I don't know if it was at this time, but I remember talking to you in a grocery store. I had to be on a cell phone. And does that make sense? Probably, but I'm sure there were cell phones in 2002. But you were talking about this album, and I went and checked it out, and I loved it. From beginning to end. I said that again, but this is one of our guests. I don't know if we'll ever do it. It has, or potential future guests had suggested looking at albums that are 10 out of 10, like perfect from start to finish. And I actually think Tennessee qualifies. It's one of the best albums I've ever heard. Different sounds throughout. The songwriting is stellar. I love it. And so I went with the third song in. I could have picked any of the songs on there and been happy. But I went with third song in because this is our third song in interview with Tom Polachek. He introduced me to this band. So I went with Nights Like These, the guy wallowing in pity because nights like these where he's remembering the love that left him. And so it's just a great, great album. I owe it all to Tom. So I figured that was the most fitting choice for my playlist pick.
I love that song. Tennessee might be my favorite Lucero album, although it's really hard to pick because, frankly, I don't think there's a Lucero album that's less than 9 out of 10. That particular song, first of all, it's so great when they play it live. It's awesome on that album. I just I couldn't be happier with that choice. They actually put out an album not too long ago, within the last few years, where they played Tennessee in order and in front of a live audience and recorded it, and it's really cool to listen to if you get a chance as well. But I think I can't say enough about that band or that song. I think that's a good pick. So I did actually follow the theme of Tom Polachek. What I did was I went back, I tried to think of the very first song that I loved. And it ended up, there were two that came to mind for me. They both came from my parents' record collections. The one that I decided to go with was actually from that box of 45s that was in the basement of my house. That was my mom's collection. And it is the song "I'm a Believer" by the Monkees. Now, depending on the age of the listener here, they might not even know who the hell the Monkees were, but the Monkees were it was a TV show about a band. It was a prefabricated band, and it was based upon the Beatles. The idea was that they were trying to capitalize, I think, on the incredible popularity of the Beatles. So the Monkees is an American version, I guess, of that band. In a lot of ways, they feel very fake, because they made them for TV. But the reality is the guys that were in that band, and in particular Mike Nesmith, who I guess technically was the leader of the band, as much as there might have been one, he was a supremely talented guy. I found out much later in life that he was one of the kind of seminal people for the alt country movement that came around when we were, in the late 80s, 90s. He laid the groundwork for a lot of the bands like Uncle Tupelo and Bottle Rockets and those guys. And "I'm a Believer" is just one of the catchiest pop songs ever. And it came out in 1967. So it came out when I was 1 year old. I think I listened to it probably when I was 6 or 7. I can remember being in the basement by myself of our house in Indiana. We had one of those, do you remember those spring horses? It was like a horse. We hold on the handles that had springs on 4 corners and you would bounce on it. I would sit on that, bounce on that, and sing "I'm a Believer" along with the record player until it was over. Then I'd go get off the horse, put the needle back on the record, and listen to it again. And I would do that for hours. I was a weird kid, man. I'm telling you. And I loved a lot of Monkees songs, but that was the first one I can remember. I knew all the words. I loved to sing it. I loved to listen to it, and I listened to it again last night, and I thought, you know what? This is a great song. This is a great pop song. And I think that, when you say the Monkees, it's kind of, it's kind of the punchline a lot of times. But again, the reality is they put together a bunch of really good musicians and songwriters and came up with some really good stuff. So my runner up is the song "Fire and Rain," which is one of the most beautiful, sad songs. And I thought about, hey, let's just put the saddest song, the oldest sad song I could remember listening to, and it's probably "Fire and Rain." The problem for me was the first time I heard that song was sung by John Denver. He had an album that came out in 1971 called "Poems, Prayers, and Promises," and my folks were huge John Denver fans. And he's kind of cheesy. I think he probably deserves more credit than he gets. But even back then, I felt like he was a little cheesy. But I love that song. I found out not too long after that, though, that it was a cover. He was covering James Taylor's version, which came out in 1970. JT's version is better, I think. But either way, when I hear either of those songs, again, I know every word. I close my eyes when I listen to it, and it just kind of fills you with a lot of emotion. And I was very close to recommending that because it's in a lot of ways it's probably a song that's more consistent with what I usually like to listen to. But if it's the very first song I loved, it's "I'm a Believer" by the Monkees. So that's what's going to go on the playlist.
Very nice. And that whole story, even your backup, which you love to do, brought back
I do love a backup.
Brought back so many memories because I don't know why, but we did a game show episode. I talked about how that was my pseudo babysitter because I would just watch those shows all the time. But whenever the Monkees came on, I remember getting super excited. I don't know. There's something about the way it started. It was all exuberant and hey,
Yeah.
we're the Monkees. I was just. But then "Fire and Rain" totally resonated too. My parents had James Taylor's Greatest Hits album, which I remember was an all-white cover. It was a very boring cover, but it was very distinguished. And I listened to that album all the time, and I loved Fire. "Fire and Rain" is a beautiful song. I didn't have a little, well, that was the Monkees, but I do want to go back to the little horsey. Did you name your horse? Did he have a name?
I don't think I named him. If I did, it's lost to history. But I can remember bouncing on that thing. Like I said, it just seemed like when I picture it in my head, I'm like, what a weird little kid.
Great choices. Good additions to the playlist.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's a good one.
Well, Tom, this brings us to the end of your episode. Third Song In is recorded in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and Joliet, Illinois, Tom's hometown.
You can email us at thirdsongin@gmail.com. You can also rate and review our podcast wherever you listen to it. So Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, YouTube Music. Give us all your goddamn stars. Share the podcast if you would, and tell people about it. We would really appreciate it. You can also find our playlists, both the season-long playlists and our special curated playlists on your music streamers.
And check out our website, thirdsonginpodcast.com. From the front page, you can listen to our most recent episodes. There's a direct link to our weekly blogs. We have pages that have the recommendations we make each week, staff picks, and we have an As Mentioned page where we have information about our guests that have appeared on the show in prior episodes.
We also have a Facebook page. You can communicate to us through there. We do have a Substack as well. Please subscribe to our blog on Substack. It is still free. We'd also ask you to tune in next week for our episode, our interview, rather, with author and immigration lawyer Bami Adebayo.
And you've been listening to Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, just do the website stuff again.
I'll do it again. It's, I couldn't have fucked that up more. Well, I could have. I have in the past. So
just start screaming.
check
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I just made myself laugh.
This is our. Well, you're the only one that you make laugh.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Anything you want to add before we close this one out?
No.
As insightful as ever.